again, like most people take for granted what it is in this society or this world that we live in, to look at the industrial pathway in that revolutionary standard that keeps the world constantly ticking over as a result of its ability to keep at pace with the trends in which, like, fashioned to the marketplace or competitive in every respect, bolsters and boosts the actual outcome for any industry where the pathway had already been laid down, like a foundation, concrete in its own regard, to again, like, address it through the way in which, whether or not industry or companies or certain business practices advance and perfectly blow out with an attempt, I suppose, every time the scheme is laid down through the practice laws and whatnot, to basically glorify it every step of the way, as if to, like, say, go from strength to strength, like generation to generation. Every aspect of our industrialized pathway, which we actually gave birth to as a people, and this very much does, I suppose, link. It actually perfectly combines the global / universal outlook for Western world cultures or allied forces within the perimeter of their own verbal vernacular or some kind of capacity of dialect or lexicon, or the way in which terminology only allows it to actually take on an effect, even at the first instance, like time being the greatest indicator of anything, and then to be able to precipitate it or basically include it. They'll call it implement, but basically sort of like catch wreck and just jump straight on the groove of the needle of the bloody of the sands of time, basically, and yet, whilst that is the case, the basis of conformity, like a world which, having laid down the foundation so that the industries and those career scale undertakings can be much more vastly reputable as a result of the way in which concentration allowed it to become vibrant and fulfilling of its own determinate democratic outcome. If you only want to go, simplify or flourish like that in its respect, or and ultimately fortify the means, fortify via familiarity. Now, we know what it's like for a world to basically lobby against certain industries or lobby against certain groups or market share, period, or market share full stop. And we do know what it's like for people to, I guess, be very envious of others with certain infrastructure plans that would be the envy of the world, especially with regional balances, and it all links to the way in which, like, that market share has an amazing impact on the zone capacity of not just, like, countries, let alone the planet within an orbit system, but of course, just like that great ingenuity in which, like, the technology advancing from the actual premise of the industry's foundation being laid down, can I guess target the idealism or the ideal lifestyle which, like, precipitates or stands alongside and moving forward with congressional pathways to that effect, so that just like a 21st century prototype model citizenship, it somehow incorporates itself. So now the title of this sort of short-length ministry, again kept within a box sequence of roughly half an hour, 30 to 40 minutes, it'd be mainly aligned, this ministry, with a title or a topic which I like to call The Glimpse of a Shadow. Or title of this one, the or a glimpse of a shadow. Now, we'll take certain theoretical pathways of creativity and imagination for people to not just sort of like incorporate their own mystified realm of life on earth and help keep at steady pace, keep at a steady paced congressionalism that, just like academic freedom, would have them best placed to be able to also venture into the world of ideology, and those that would like to, I guess, summons masses or mass proportionate scale of outreach, whereas like time being that indicator, if they were to and it was presented that way, well, absolutely good for you. I wish you the best of luck. Godspeed. The fact that like our ability in which to implement our concern for a people and a worldwide mass, in massed, on guard, on we, everything sort of there. So that just like the assessment capabilities of a world that, you know, controls its own zone and also does everything it can to be with both time and space, as much as the elements of resource trade mechanisms or skills bargaining capabilities or mass proportionate scale of runoff and shortfall and all that, as if to say, like that precipice, like that incline, even if it means shortfalls allow certain industries to slow down, it still is basically like checked or topped every step of the way as the only option. Okay, to be as shallow as a snake is like a life, people with costumes, which we'll say like the conveyed lifestyle of people free and equal in which to hop on the meaning of life and basically persist with the contextualization of your perfect, holistic, upright, consecrated, 100% conservative key existence, you know, resonating that detail every time puts into the perspective framework or the outlook of most of society with any prior knowledge of concept period, to look at things in a sort of a downsized or a scapegoat recognition of leeway excuses, which we might like to call law infringements in some respect, where we take certain terminology in the modern day world, which obscure and is separate, as segregated as it may be, just like the social slang or the corrupted talk of certain people who like the allocated pathway to digest it. It has an overt concentration and an effect on the way in which people persevere and that they strive to succeed, keeping in perfect synchronism with their choreographic, like it be the competency level of those things via the industry in which you're succeeding with or successing, keeps it secure and locked to an effect where, like the pop-off regard of people incorporated to that sense of proprietary and scheme, like an industry, but of course certainly like the foundation of this planet and our system and our marketplace and commercial world, but of course to bring into the perfect realm of contextualization of what it's like to understand the world or this planetary sphere, this absolute planet, this capsule in which encapsulates that foundation, and regardless of what we actually do for ourselves, it glides by the pressable fact that just like a world dominating that theoretical way of life, they commit to a kind of insubordinate fear, don't they? And that insubordinate fear takes people out of context. A glimpse of a shadow basically puts people into a choreographed sense of uprooted endlessness, where like a typical old North American Sioux Indian or the Navajos or Cherokees, I'm not exactly sure exactly who they would be, but of course, like, put your hand up and say how. Like a first word. To me, that's like, well, like a who, what, when, where, why, how. Like a how, like, or forget the fact that video cameras there, what's actually behind, like if there was a car and behind the car was a tree. But he's sort of like how, because before car was even in front of him, the how was like an eagle. This was that saw everything and like soaring, like whatever. And it's like, there's a tree. It would be amazing that thing needs to be sawed. But as you look at it and it stays concrete, upright, consecrated to that regard, the way in which the world tends to look at a world well ahead of time is to disregard the tree. Pop off regard, or pop off disregard. It didn't even think of it. It had something else in front of it, like a dollar sign. And like in the Garden of Eden, like the foundation from the beginning in the Christian Bible, talking about the foundation in which God created man. Talks about a snake, and like that dollar sign might as well be a spineless snake. Slithering spineless snake. And like its pathway, it keeps its spinal cord tracked with two lines right down the middle of the S, like, you know, to keep the pathway bridged with that which you don't know, but still like pop off, disregard, or take people to out of context of what it is to both persist with it in a congressional upbringing and the strength and the zest of the qualitative life of human beings, quantified against the numbers and the masses, regardless, or, you know, no matter what. And summons to that detail, we choreograph all of our efforts in which somehow, which doesn't necessarily in a congruent sense, persist with the individual based within that marketplace industry or business front as an intermeshed societal someone. And yet we talk about socio-economical poverty in some of the most richest countries in the world. We talk about socio-economical shortfall in the lives of individuals who just like the masses in which to keep up with and having to control it somehow. It evades the way in which, just like that top be a tick to be reminded, it clock blocks the shine of every sort of scaled back or drawn down, downscaled predisposition, you know, in which was irrelevant to the pathway of something so cut like a mad snake and out of control that even the regard of knowing that it's there, like the concept, somehow had to bottleneck its approach because like it puts it through a totally different sort of lens, which like insubordinates might look at it as a shadow and not the individual. It might look at it as something just sort of off skew, as something hypothetical and supposed so, or supposedly, not simply the trait, or you know, the core estimate of the primitive thing that it be. It's far less a concern than a portion of degree, and like those portions of degrees, and our blindedness, sometimes even literally our eyesight. You know, refractions dominate the margin and you can't even see. To be asked what it is to see, be able to see colours properly, to be given people eye tests, to understand what it is to be blind as Aristarchus, to the point where you're constantly cooking marshmallow parsnips, and it was great. The taste, I'm not sure, but it went down okay. So you thought you thought you know. You thought it was a thought. It was a philosophy. It was a think. It was actually a tank. It was a thank you too. And there was somewhere that you drifted off to. The context of being a man or raised within the the scope of a conquest, to ask why we're put here on earth and what it is to actually venture outside those workplace practices in which we are supposed to redeem day in, day out. Like they'll tell you how kids have to go to school for 6.5 hours a day, but then once they come home, either they're supposed to do their homework and they'll tell us that, or that life wasn't 24/7 education. And we'll go to work with our work, and then we'll come back after work at some stage, we'll just coop up, lamp in the crib. And if you actually go to coincide and go over and redeem spreadsheets and references, like just being in certain industries, call it the music industry, you got instruments to play, and people all of a sudden instantly will not allow you to play those instruments. You know what it's like with drum kits to be able to play at 10 o'clock in the morning. You know what it's like to be able to even sort of play stereos, or what it is to be able to, like an instrument which needs to be tested and fired and practiced and everything to keep at pace with that industrial pathway and the advanced technological capabilities, like within that zone. People talk about being in it but having no capacity in which to sort of govern it and run with it as the world continues to fail the means of fortification, because somehow, like the familiarities, like the goddamn forfeiture, people concentrate so heavily on what they have in life rather than what they forever step into. It's what it is to be prepared before you are positioned. And like a predisposition, in a sense, it's like, well, dispositions can be actually seen very pleasant and agreeable to people, and people adorn it, and people allow it, and people specify and vouch for it. And yet others can absolutely be seen as something that's correlated with a certain environmental or a social stress. And a lot of the times the economic pathway in which for people to meet the contextualized freedom in which to succeed with it has some kind of dollar or money attached to it, which it pre-eliminates you to be able to construct it within the realm of the system, the world, the governed region, the entity, the foundation, the world, whatever, the encapsulated planet. And then because even without nothing to utilize maximum resource or maximum conditions, maximize those conditions, it gets instantly taxed at, it gets bracketed, it gets slammed with disrepute. It throws the entire sort of thing behind bars where you need some way in which to validate, even through the you sort of, how do you say to people stop? And then before they, even when they start, you say, well, how dare you live and breathe your job 24/7? You're to help me stir the pot, and you're to fuck me. And before you come back home, before you leave to go to work, you're already back. You could have your back against the wall. You could have some kind of superseded obstruction occurring just about every time, because just like that wireless approach to life, it actually dominates the level of disrepute, which, looking for something outside the perimeters of that constructed pathway, the shadow ministry, just like opposition in parliament, took effect in which to somehow engulf it and literally molester it and somehow sort of confine it and compound it away from society, or compound it away from the generalized view or the scope of people, like a world built to congressionalize and to secure and stabilize a peaceful environment as limited to transgression and iniquity as any regional people or zone or government would allow, in order to somehow suffice the remedy. And never in its premise, let alone its concept notoriety, does the scheme actually take place. Everything is sort of seen as a scheme. But it's most certainly a scheme if you somehow generalize outside the realm of impurity. Or, you know, there where the imputiny sort of takes effect too, and like a derivated science to know what it is to even necessarily give a flying fish co fact about that. People would loom to a degree of insight and concentration which benedicts no real congressional determination or, you know, determined pathway to solve. It was actually, what I'm getting at is no one's business. Because just like a snake in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve or God, why give a fuck about a beast? Why give a fuck about a snake? Why give a fuck about serpentry? Why give a fuck about witchcraft? Why at this stage would not even first man or first woman even dare listen to God? Think about it. Why would any of these humans, period, take a serpent and believe the word of a serpent or anything like that? And the health, wealth, and self-determination of fucking serpentry and witchcraft, in opposed to a God, a loving God, who provided it, as if there would be no real sense of understanding of these two people, Adam and Eve. So it would be like God would have no greater core estimate from the beginning if people would just believe him or believe anything. You know where the dangers are met, and you know what it's like to actually be as shallow as a gutless snake. And this is where the world somehow sort of has an indemnity crisis which doesn't actually monumentalize itself on the surface. Key, so that every time it sort of like serves as a reminder, like the civil liberties of fair practice, democracy, freedom, the natural course of justice and nature, the natural course of freedom, let alone a fairness. Talk about equality, or what it is to be an equal opportunistic, or someone with an optimism, of course, which, like, given the leeway through trade practice licenses or something like that, could actually be readily identified from the beginning to either fail or succeed, what can only be described as, like I said, say like a glimpse of a shadow of a snake's a snake's, or what do you call it, a scheme or something like a. I'll have to repeat that. I've got a writer's block there of options, so you'd like to think that it was actually from the beginning just law and order, like the big law and order books, like people used and served that as a reminder. Monumental as that would be, so that people, like a good Christian, you might say, would actually be able to substantiate any sort of negative or foul estimate that, I guess, having to sort of contextualize with a world provided for its systematic scheme or trait would serve it well, like the Law and Order book, but of course like something like just good common sense and practice. A lot of people tend to be just too good in this world. You're just a good person. You're the first person that may actually say that you're a Christian, and like being a major departmental head or public figure of a Christian nation, of nations that are Christianic based, or Christendom. But if you were to commit crimes, you'd probably be the first people to defend those crimes. And you try to, you pay your way with money to pay for QC lawyers or SC lawyers, like you're not even aware of the crime you did. You're actually not even formally or fundamentally aware of the crime in which you actually commit, only to somehow defend it and pay somebody else to defend it. That you're so good. The point I'm making is, how do you sort of commit a crime and not walk straight to jail? Like from the beginning, it was sort of like the law, the principle of law, or universal, like scientific, governing scientific rollouts or outlays or layouts or practices, period. You can see the result before it happens. And like the time, like the space, and like the energy and the resources and manpower and intelligence, you'll find that even like the big goddamn courts, you can't even get lawyers or solicitors to be able to enter court with perfect criminal infringement and penalty formally recognised by a lawyer, mind you. And they'll already find ways to disembark from it, like a glimpse of a shadow, like up at Section 32, Part 8, or under the Law and Order Act 1864 or something. You know what I mean? It bottlenecks. Like it sort of becomes like a chute, like an escape chute, like a laundry chute where the whole bloody law firm's burning down. Like a hollow cost, like even $1 that they can't meet, let alone a ding-dong brain affair. You know what I mean? Because they don't necessarily have what it takes, but you can see it. And basically they'll look for a way in which to, I guess, desensitize it and not even get it to the court, the big judge. Because he wouldn't even be confident that he could beat the judge, because he wouldn't even have enough brains to pre-propose anything to say, to tell the whole wide world, the big monument, that there had been a crime occurred that needs, that needs to be brought before the governor, the practice powers of the court, so that next time, of course, it continues to fortify and strengthen its means in which to perfectly choreograph and make the 21st century prototype citizenship become much more, consecrated and reserved for that special use of advanced terminology, or we'll just say, terms and conditions. But you don't. You sort of defended it. See? You defended it, but then it's like, okay, well then you'll go to say there, well, like, is there any way to really subpersonify the goods or the personal wealth, health and self-determination of a life form? We'll constantly use the fact that we're a human as an excuse to be able to receive leeway and sympathy from judgments where, just like the judgment of evil thoughts, there's much more than a crossfire when it comes to be able to govern your own, exercise your own power, when you have never even fought the battlefield. You've never even put it into an arena to be able to perfectly construct even combat mechanisms where you might look to it as something that you fashion and manipulate to your own governing advantage, where just like that lack of brains or lack of maturity or lack of intellectual sensibility or law at your disposal, or even the money to be able to fight a lot of these courts, you'll find yourself derivating. And like a glimpse of a shadow, your laws are always constantly talking to people like they've got mental insufficiencies or mental, like insufficiency or something. That it becomes like a mental disorder first and foremost, but something of any disorder basically means that it can be corrected through order, like it actually wasn't mentally sick or mentally conditioned or mentally ill or mentally diseased. To say like law and order, but then if something is not abiding by law and order, it might only be seen as unlawful or disorderly. Transgression and iniquity, basically, but you actually put like city suburbs, like capital central business district precincts, where nightclubs and all these sort of places that are given birth to drugs, alcohol abuse, violence, physical violence and sexual immorality, all kinds of disgusting socio-economic platforms in which, like the conversation in which we bring home, all socio-economics actually starts and exists within the family home. All the statistics actually provide a runoff from any one. All the kind of relapses, like the primitive zest or worth of what we weigh up and take it full-fledged 100%, right, is a conservative shortfall, because like people that actually aren't up for the challenge, they weren't even there. Just like the lackluster lawyer, or just like somebody that might have been knocked out with a hangover from alcohol abuse, which actually perfectly medically is classified as unconscious state, comatose state. They weren't even available to actually get anything done. They actually wiped themselves out of the picture. It didn't happen. Some incident might have actually happened when it did, but never did to that person like the lawyer, because they were knocked out. They were comatose. They didn't know anything. They had dead ding-dong brains. It just didn't happen. There could actually be some kind of glimmer of hope for people to be able to speak underwater or dribble shit to someone much more stronger and congruent than the average Joe Blow or Peter Pan, to suffice to that good realm and good energy, or to that good zest, and the realm or the field of operation, whether it be the industry or just the retained knowledge and information that coincides with what you actually do for life. You'd be actually granted your practice, and you would be fortified as a practice by standing to help people that are in need. The society says that, like lawyers, you're actually supposed to seek them when the central powers of law enforcement, the police force, were unable to. The criminals or the defendants, the plaintiffs, they don't even know what happened. The lawyers didn't even bring it. And yet it's the only way to the fucking place that actually fucking topples and bloody rotates on a dime, or parks on a goddamn meter, like time, like space, everything, you know, to combat it. So basically, it's like combat fatigue, isn't it? It's like a life that is like very nutshell. It's a nutshell fatigue, a combat fatigue. Living within a nutshell. It's not necessarily just under your skin waiting to pop out like a brand new you. It's actually somehow sort of deep rooted and very distilled within its own sort of lackluster approach to time and space and everything. It boxes it up. What we do in life is we tend to somehow live in a world but not of a world. And somehow, in most cases, for God's good people, those true Christians that are just like a good Muslim or an Islamic or a Buddhist or a Confucius or a Protestant or something like that, or a Gandhi, a great Gandhi. Look at the way in which to live in a world but not of a world, but then to be a world within a world. A world within a world where, just like the schools, minimalizing the time and the space in which to much more verifiably control numbers and masses, places that are like institutions kept separate to actually fortify and strengthen individuals, given thousands of hours of private paid for intuition to spell out the numbers in which, just like that industrial pathway for man, brings about another, let's say 1,000 kids in a school, another 1,000 objectives. Which every last one of them, with 21,000 hours of paid intuition, even between the grade 1 or grade 12, produced nothing. Or the maths and science and phys ed and home economics or speech and drama or accounting or religion or English class or language class. What did it provide for your child after 21,000 hours of private intuition? It got them the ability to perfectly read a clock on a wall, but only use their physical, practical attributes in which to run for a train to make it to work on time, to become a console operator / customer service operator that can't actually read their own company's price board, their price chart, and operate a cash till or a calculator correctly. What is to run for a fucking train and become a cashier? You know? What it is to be able to... What the fuck are you being trained to do even amongst that fucking institution? What the fuck is that? Sorry, what the fuck is that PhD? What the fuck is that mastery? And what is this fucking bachelorism? Bachelor of what? Sometimes scientifically, it actually, that minimalized time and space just stares through a fucking microscope. To avoid the fucking world, live a world within a world. Are you wobbling the fuck out asking somebody for annual funding to keep your posse the fuck up? Because you know, just being a scientist so smart and shit, you ain't got a fucking job. No, you do perfectly, but it's like if you don't keep the funds rolling over, how the fuck do you keep on living? How do you even stay in the right place of employment? You'll tell the whole world that you're sort of at it. You're sort of at it. I'm about trying to fix it. I'm nearly there. Keeping everybody on tenterhooks. Just to make sure the money comes in, just to make sure that you're employed, and just to make sure that that industry stays afloat. And whilst it sort of, congressionalises itself with the pathway and the outlook for mankind, you're just holding back like something you should have fucking pretty much sourced as quickly as possible, like special little kids that are supposed to put their test scores and their sheets down to get marked after 3 hours on the clock. Not a second later, put your pencils down, hand in your test, end of year test. A lot of people in these scientific realms are just so precious. They're like special kids with special learning difficulties, not being able to get it done. They're so precious that, oh my God, if they did something wrong, they'd be defending it. Saying, oh, because we're good. How the fuck do you actually take away creation and actually reap a reward? Let's say that again. How do you actually take away creation and reap a reward? It'd almost look like secondary. In the mixes and the combinations in which, like a fortifiable region of security, even through the most difficult, heinous military regimes of oppression and persecution and guilt and conflict, to be able to sift through the cracks of irony and perfectly filter out the bad and infiltrate the good. We're just like the positive realm of aspect ratio, whatever the hell. Every big picture sort of made clear once all the little things have been taken care of. To people, it's basing itself on a crumb. To people, it's basing themselves on a crutch. To people, it's basing themselves on a minute glimpse of a shadow, where refractions do dominate the margin, and yet no one, like your pathway, for the right reason, can actually afford to be part of gutless companies. Because if any sort of world, let alone the foundation, like anybody that objects, that shouldn't actually play a part in that rollout or that outlay, if they had any real guts and determination and grit and counterpart intelligence given one's time and commitment to meet that feat, right? You wouldn't have to afford anything. And you would just have really good company. Now, they say misery loves company. That's why your employers are likely to pay you butt plug cheap, like $19 an hour. Because even after tax, like a child submissive to something condemning them or held at ransom in the beginning, like the father that we must submit to a life of poverty and chastity and charity, and get their kids' pocket money for an hour and pay the bills, pay the mortgage. And if you don't do it, you'll be subject to rehabilitation or institutionalized or fines greater to that effect, or what it is to keep at pace with that, because just like the incremental changes or the incremental steps that play the greatest aspect to timeline security or the indication of where time's headed, like the perfect construction realm or the constructive realm of a world working itself out, it becomes digital, doesn't it? It had switched from a 20th century analog predisposition to now what can only be described as an analog disposition or preposition, in opposed to a digital predisposition, where the disposition actually lays resting and dormant, and it lays with the perfect control of individuals succeeding with law and order above all things, and within the general agreeable concentration of a world helping, like understanding it. It understands the numbers. It controls everything. How the world is sort of zeros and ones. And if you sort of don't judge yourself, any game of life, whether scheme, industry, to succeed, period, it falls into self-deception. Because you are decepted. It's deflected. It's taken away from the consecrated worth and value and input and involvement of a world that first allowed you to buy into it. And like being bravely implicated in anything or involved, period, they'll convict people and indict them for a thread of cotton. They will fleece every goddamn constructed criticism against the grain of notoriety to scheme itself out of something that requires greater scrutiny on the part of some third-party bystander or someone to make a mediated decision on behalf of something that had been brought to the attention of an obstructed time frame, like a sequence that needs to be that obstructs people. It's like socio-media predatory affecting the parliamentarians and those great ministers and great advisories and auxiliary codes of conduct and practice, helping shape and form the policies for our future societies and generations to come, and putting it into the political debate as if to substantiate that degree that became even having a right or a privilege in which to do so. The instrumentality at the feet of all mankind absolutely perfectly rests with the economic strength and stability of people to meet the challenge of being able to fortify their means and fortify the familiarity, fortify outcomes. Because like anything that takes away the greater dependence on yourself is corruption. It's like that with a mildewed photograph. It's like that with a corrupted data file. It's like that with something that was found in the first case and made bravely implicated into a wedded lifestyle or a career pathway or a determinate practice to something that occurred, but you know, and if it doesn't keep you intact, that's where obstructions occur and things for greater scrutiny, or why there's effects that takes away why you loved it or implicated it in the first place. If you just keep people intact, you wouldn't have to, you wonder why there's problems. And it might be because you're trying to change people. And if it means change them, then it actually defeated the purpose of actually having a case or a lawful excuse to bring it before the court with a trade license, or bring it before the framework of the imagination or the plighted imaginations of a world unsure of itself and its construction, can benefit or be given the benefit of the doubt in which to strive with it, because it would have a compelling case. Far too often the world's being coerced into its repute, in which just like word of mouth have been able to face people appropriately, sort of wears an ingratiated mask like a mad, insane person behind a plotted scheme. If it meant like that plot or like that scheme, it's like maybe the person doesn't even ultimately fundamentally understand who they are, because they probably don't even know who they are. They were supposed to wear the uniform and they were supposed to wear the industrial right in which to do so. But if it actually incriminates or infringes human, right, who might be totally oblivious to your pathway scheme of industrialized benefit or future to be seen, rightful in the eyes of the law itself, or the governors to say, well, do what you do. But the moment you start believing that it's not about that it's anyone but you, or start to believe that it's something to do with somebody else, then it's like saying that you haven't got what it takes and it's all about you. To do what you do via approval, and need all kinds of approval to be able to guarantee, or some seal of approval that, I guess, given the approval allowed you to keep things sweet and keep things cool with a sense of repute. That like, not cutting in on something else. And then to perfectly address and ask the question via inquisition drawn to that scale of premise where the obstruction occurred or infringement, now we ask, and now we put it towards the pathway, like strive with you, being subject to this in the world and still live, coincide in harmony and perfect congruence. Peace I give you, peace I leave with you. And ask the question, well, why do you do what you do? And you might say, well, we don't need approval for that. How people concentrate on what they have rather than what they step into. How the choice of how the freedom of choice can stress others. Well, what about the choice of freedom that others stress? Say there has to be a way to work it out because there's a problem to defend a mistrust or a dispelled trust or an account of some sort. A failed articulated degree of upkeep and maintenance of a perfect recognition and a highlighted incident. How do people sort of learn from it if people only veer from the steadfast capabilities of operation in which to have trust in people who would be the first ones in the first place stepping over the line or causing the infringements or having a problem? It's rather incompetent of the masses via any industry to have employees that pass their problems on to anyone within their staff. Because like the individual, you would actually fail the use of your denomination. You would fail those competencies in which you are trained, in which to execute when it comes to the game of life. Comes automatically, just like your industry